I, 34F, have been struggling with a family situation that's been causing me sleepless nights for months now. It all centers around my younger sister, Ella, 29F, her estranged husband Richard, 31M, and their two kids, Jill, 7F, and Jack, 4M. To give you some context, Ella and Richard met in college. They were the classic opposites attract couple. Ella was always the responsible, organized one, while Richard was more laid-back and spontaneous. They balanced each other out well, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. They got married right after graduation, and within a year, Jill came along. I remember how excited Richard was when Jill was born. He'd spend hours just watching her sleep, talking about all the things he was going to teach her. When Jack was born 3 years later, Richard was over the moon. He'd always wanted a son, and he couldn't wait to take Jack fishing and camping. But somewhere along the line, things started to change. Richard got a new job that required more travel, and he seemed to be away more often than not. Ella was left juggling 2 young kids and a full-time job of her own. The strain started to show in their relationship. About a year ago, Ella called me in tears. She found messages on Richard's phone that suggested he might be having an affair. When she confronted him, he denied it at first, but eventually admitted to an emotional connection with a coworker. He swore nothing physical had happened, but the trust was broken. They tried counseling for a few months, but it didn't seem to help. Richard was defensive and uncooperative, according to Ella. Finally, about 8 months ago, they decided to separate. They agreed that Richard would have the kids every other weekend, and they'd reassess the situation after 6 months. At first, things seemed to be going okay. Richard would pick up the kids on Friday evening and drop them off on Sunday night. But gradually, he started making excuses. One weekend, he had to work late. The next, he wasn't feeling well. It got to the point where he was only taking the kids maybe once a month, if that. I have 3 kids of my own, twins Emma and Olivia, 8F, and Noah, 9M. They get along great with their cousins, so I started offering to take Jill and Jack when Richard would cancel. I figured it was better for them to have fun with their cousins than to be disappointed by their dad. The thing is, Richard started taking advantage of this. He'd call me directly to ask if I could take the kids on his weekend, saying things like, "They always have more fun at your place anyway." It frustrated me to no end, but I didn't want to say no to the kids. I tried talking to Richard about it several times. I told him he needed to step up and be there for his kids. He'd always have excuses. He was too busy with work, or he wasn't feeling well, or he had plans he couldn't cancel. It felt like he was treating his time with his kids as optional. This situation brought back a lot of painful memories for me. My ex-husband, Brian, wasn't much better when we first separated. He'd cancel at the last minute, leaving me scrambling to find childcare. It took me a long time to realize that his behavior wasn't just hurting me, it was hurting our kids too. Things came to a head last month. It was Richard's weekend, but he called me on Friday afternoon asking if I could take the kids. His excuse this time? He had tickets to a concert he'd forgotten about. I was furious but agreed to take the kids. When Ella came to pick them up on Sunday, she looked exhausted. She confided in me that she was struggling with Richard's unreliability. She never knew if he'd actually take the kids, which made it hard for her to plan anything on her weekends off. I sympathized with her, thinking about my own experience with Brian. I told her how I'd eventually changed our custody arrangement so that Brian only got the kids when he specifically asked for them, and I agreed. I explained how much easier it was not having to depend on him sticking to a schedule, and how my kids were happier not being constantly let down. Ella seemed to really take this to heart. She thanked me for listening and left with the kids. I thought that was the end of it, but apparently, she talked to Richard about changing their arrangement. The next day, Richard called me, absolutely livid. He accused me of trying to turn Ella against him and take his kids away. I was shocked. I hadn't told Ella to do anything, I just shared my own experience. I tried to explain this to Richard, but he wouldn't listen. He kept yelling about how I was a terrible sister and how I should mind my own business. Finally, I had enough and snapped back at him. I told him if he wasn't such an unreliable father, Ella wouldn't be considering changing things. Now my family's divided. My parents are siding with Richard, saying I shouldn't have interfered. They've always had a soft spot for Richard ever since he helped Dad renovate their kitchen a few years ago. My brother thinks I did the right thing. He's never been Richard's biggest fan, especially after Richard forgot his birthday 2 years in a row. Ella's thanked me for opening her eyes, but now she's getting pressure from our parents to leave things as they are. They keep saying that Richard's just going through a rough patch and needs support, not criticism. I'm starting to wonder if I overstepped. Should I have kept my mouth shut about my own experience? Am I the asshole for indirectly causing this family drama? I can't help but think about Jill and Jack in all of this. Jill's old enough to understand that her dad keeps canceling on them, and I've seen how disappointed she gets. Jack's still too young to really grasp what's going on, but he's started asking why they don't see their dad as much anymore. Part of me feels like I need to step back and let Ella and Richard figure this out on their own. But another part of me wants to fight for those kids, to make sure they don't grow up feeling like their dad doesn't want to spend time with them. I keep thinking about my own kids, and how much happier they've been since I changed things with Brian. They know when they're going to see him now, and he rarely cancels because he has to commit to the time in advance. It's made such a difference in their lives. But maybe every situation is different. Maybe Richard really is just going through a rough patch and will get better. Maybe I'm projecting my own experiences onto Ella's situation. I just don't know what to do now. Should I apologize to Richard and my parents? Should I stand my ground? Should I stay out of it entirely from now on? I feel like no matter what I do, someone's going to be upset with me. Update 1, it's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has happened. First, I want to thank everyone for their support and advice. It really helped me see that I wasn't in the wrong for sharing my experience with Ella. After the initial blow-up, things were tense in our family for a while. Our parents kept trying to pressure Ella into leaving the custody arrangement as it was, saying Richard just needed more time to adjust to being a single dad. Ella was torn, she didn't want to rock the boat, but she was also tired of Richard's unreliability. During this time, I tried to stay out of it as much as possible. I still had Jill and Jack over to play with my kids, but I made sure to arrange it with Ella, not Richard. I didn't want to give him any more ammunition to use against me. One weekend, when the kids were over, Jill asked me why her daddy didn't want to spend time with them anymore. It broke my heart. I tried to explain that her daddy loved her very much, but sometimes grown-ups have a hard time showing it. I'm not sure she understood, but she seemed a little less sad after our talk. Things came to a head about 2 weeks ago. It was supposed to be Richard's weekend with the kids. Ella dropped them off on Friday evening, only to get a call from Richard at 9 p.m. He said he had to go out of town for work and asked if she could come get the kids. Ella was furious, she'd already made plans for her child-free weekend. That's when Ella called me. She was in tears, asking if I could take the kids for the night. Of course, I agreed. When she dropped them off, Jill was crying, asking why her daddy didn't want to spend time with them. Jack was confused and cranky, not understanding why they were being shuffled around so late at night. The next day, Ella came over early. She was determined to confront Richard and change their arrangement. She asked if I'd watch the kids while she went to talk to him, which I agreed to do. While Ella was gone, I tried to keep the kids distracted. We baked cookies, played board games, and even started a pillow fort in the living room. But I could tell they were worried. Jill kept asking when her mom was coming back, and Jack was more clingy than usual. Ella was gone for hours. When she came back, she looked drained but relieved. She told me that she and Richard had a long, difficult conversation. Richard initially tried to defend himself, saying work was just really busy right now. But Ella stood her ground. She told Richard that from now on, he wouldn't have set weekends with the kids. Instead, he'd have to ask her at least a week in advance if he wanted to take them for a weekend. If he canceled last minute, he'd lose his next chance to have them. Richard wasn't happy about this, but Ella didn't back down. She told him that his behavior was hurting the kids, and this was his last chance to prove he could be reliable. Our parents weren't thrilled when they found out. They came over to my house that evening, saying I'd poisoned Ella against Richard. I stood my ground, telling them that Richard's behavior was the problem, not my advice to Ella. It turned into a huge argument. Our dad kept saying Richard was doing his best, and our mom accused me of being jealous because Richard was a better father than my ex. That really hurt. My ex might not have been perfect, but at least he showed up when he said he would. I reminded them of all the times Richard had canceled on the kids, how disappointed Jill and Jack always were. I asked them if they really thought it was okay for Richard to treat his children like they were optional. That seemed to give them pause, but they still insisted that we needed to give Richard more time. The argument ended with our parents storming out, saying they needed time to think. They haven't spoken to me since, which has been hard. We've always been a close-knit family, and this rift is painful for all of us. But Ella has been incredibly supportive. She told me that our conversation had given her the courage to stand up for herself and her kids. She said she'd been so worried about keeping the peace that she'd lost sight of what was best for Jill and Jack. For now, we're in a sort of uneasy peace. Richard's agreed to the new arrangement, though he's not happy about it. Ella's feeling more in control. The kids seem a bit confused by the change, but they're adjusting. Jill asked me the other day why things were different now. I tried to explain that her mom and dad were trying to figure out the best way to make sure she and Jack got to spend time with both of them. She seemed to accept that, but I could tell she was still a little unsure. I'm still not sure if this will solve everything, but it feels like a step in the right direction. Ella seems more relaxed, knowing she won't have to deal with last-minute cancellations anymore. And I'm hopeful that this will motivate Richard to be more present when he does have the kids. As for me, I'm trying to focus on being there for Ella and the kids. I've told Ella that my door is always open if she needs to talk or if she needs help with Jill and Jack. I'm also trying to give our parents some space, hoping they'll come around eventually. It's a difficult situation, and I know it's going to take time for everyone to adjust. But I believe that in the long run, this will be better for Jill and Jack. They deserve parents they can count on, and I hope this new arrangement will help provide that. Update 2. It's been another month, and things have taken an unexpected turn. The new arrangement with Richard seemed to be working at first. He was actually asking to see the kids in advance and showing up when he said he would. Ella was cautiously optimistic. But about 2 weeks ago, Ella called me in tears. She just found out that Richard had lost his job 3 months ago and hadn't told anyone. Apparently, all those times he said he was busy with work or had to go out of town for business, he was actually going to job interviews or working odd jobs to make ends meet. This news hit Ella hard. She and Richard had always been open about their finances when they were together. They'd made all their big decisions as a team. The fact that Richard had kept this secret for so long really shook her trust in him. Ella was conflicted. On one hand, she was angry that Richard had lied to her and the kids. On the other hand, she felt guilty for being so hard on him when he was struggling. She asked me what I thought she should do. I advised her to talk to Richard calmly and get the full story before making any decisions. Ella agreed and arranged to meet with Richard the next day. Their conversation revealed a lot. Richard admitted that he'd been too ashamed to tell anyone he'd lost his job. He'd been trying to find a new one before anyone found out, but it was taking longer than he expected. He said he'd been canceling on the kids because he couldn't afford to take them out or buy them food when they were with him. This revelation put a lot of things into perspective. Richard's behavior, while still not excusable, at least had some explanation now. It made me think about how pride and shame can sometimes drive people to make poor decisions. Ella was upset that Richard hadn't been honest with her, but she also understood why he'd kept it secret. They talked for hours, trying to figure out a way forward. In the end, they came to a new agreement. Richard would still have to ask in advance to have the kids, but Ella would be more flexible with the schedule. She also agreed to help out financially when the kids were with Richard, at least until he found a new job. When Ella told me about this, I was surprised but proud of her for being so understanding. However, I also warned her to be cautious. I suggested she ask for proof of Richard's job search efforts to ensure he wasn't taking advantage of her kindness. Our parents, when they found out, had a complete change of heart. They went from criticizing Ella for being too harsh on Richard to criticizing her for being too lenient. They insisted that Richard was just making excuses and that Ella shouldn't trust him. This led to another family argument. Our parents accused me of manipulating Ella again, saying I should have encouraged her to be stricter with Richard. I stood my ground, telling them that Ella was an adult capable of making her own decisions. The argument ended with our parents declaring that they were washing their hands of the whole situation. They said they wouldn't be offering any more advice or help unless we came to our senses. This whole situation has made me reflect on how quickly we sometimes judge others without knowing the full story. While I still think Richard should have been honest from the beginning, I can understand how difficult it must have been for him to admit he'd lost his job. For now, Ella and Richard are trying to make their new arrangement work. The kids seem happier now that they're seeing their dad more regularly. Richard's been more engaged when he has them, probably because he's not constantly worried about them finding out his secret. I'm still here, supporting Ella as best I can. I've offered to help out with the kids whenever needed, and I'm keeping a close eye on the situation to make sure Richard doesn't take advantage. It's a complicated situation, and I'm not sure how it will all turn out. But I'm hopeful that this honesty and cooperation between Ella and Richard will lead to a better situation for everyone, especially the kids. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I'm still trying to process everything that's happened. Things have taken a turn that none of us expected. About 3 weeks ago, Richard called Ella in a panic. He'd finally landed a job interview for a great position, but it was scheduled for the weekend he was supposed to have the kids. He begged Ella to switch weekends with him. Ella, wanting to support Richard's job search, agreed. The day of the interview, I offered to watch Jill and Jack so Ella could have a break. Everything was going fine until about 3 p.m. when I got a frantic call from Ella. She'd just received a call from the police. Richard had been in a car accident on his way to the interview. We rushed to the hospital, not knowing what to expect. When we arrived, we were relieved to find out that Richard's injuries weren't life-threatening, but he did have a broken leg and some cuts and bruises. Here's where things get complicated. While Richard was being treated, the police officer who responded to the accident came to talk to us. He revealed that they'd found open alcohol containers in Richard's car, and his blood alcohol level was well over the legal limit. Ella was devastated. All the progress Richard seemed to be making, all the trust she'd put in him, came crashing down in that moment. She broke down right there in the hospital waiting room. I did my best to comfort her, but I was angry too. Richard had not only put himself in danger but could have hurt or killed someone else. And he'd thrown away a chance at a good job that could have helped him be a better provider for his kids. When Richard was released from the hospital a few days later, Ella confronted him. He broke down and admitted that he'd been struggling with alcohol for years, even before they separated. He said he'd been using it to cope with the stress of unemployment and the shame of not being able to provide for his family. This revelation brought back memories of our uncle, who had battled alcoholism for years. I remembered how it had torn our extended family apart, and how long it had taken for everyone to heal. I couldn't help but wonder if we were about to go through the same thing with Richard. Ella was torn. On one hand, she was furious with Richard for putting everyone at risk. On the other hand, she could see he was struggling and needed help. After a lot of discussion, and some heated arguments, they came to a decision. Richard agreed to enter a rehab program. While he's in treatment, he won't be allowed to see the kids unsupervised. Ella's arranged for him to have video calls with Jill and Jack twice a week, and she's promised to keep him updated on their lives. Explaining this to the kids was hard. Jill, being older, had a lot of questions that were difficult to answer. Jack, thankfully, was too young to fully understand what was happening. Ella decided to tell them that their dad was sick and needed to go to a special hospital to get better. Our parents, when they found out, were shocked. They apologized to Ella, and to me, for not seeing the signs earlier. They've offered to help out more with the kids and to support Richard in his recovery journey. It's been a relief to have them back on our side, even though it took such a dramatic event to bring us all together again. As for me, I'm still processing everything. I'm angry at Richard for putting so many people at risk, but I'm also hoping he gets the help he needs. Mostly, I'm focused on being there for Ella and the kids as they navigate this difficult time. Ella's been incredibly strong through all of this. She's explained the situation to the kids in an age-appropriate way, emphasizing that their dad is sick and is getting help to get better. She's also started attending Al-Anon meetings to get support for herself. I've been trying to keep things as normal as possible for Jill and Jack when they're with me. We still have our movie nights and baking sessions, but I can tell they're confused and upset. Jill's been having nightmares, and Jack's become more clingy than usual. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, and I know we have a long road ahead. But I'm cautiously hopeful that this could be a turning point for Richard and for his relationship with his kids. Only time will tell. For now, we're taking it one day at a time. Ella's focusing on the kids and on healing herself. Richard's in rehab, working on his sobriety. And I'm doing my best to be the supportive sister and aunt that my family needs right now. I've learned a lot through this whole experience. About the importance of communication, about not jumping to conclusions, and about how complex family dynamics can be. It's been challenging, but I hope that in the end, we'll all come out stronger for it.